Welcome to Rewiring Health, the podcast designed to unlock the secrets of self-worth and healing your mind and body. Hello, I'm Dr. Kelly Kessler, physical therapist, transformation coach, and your host. I spent a whole lot of time and energy seeking out a sense of fulfillment through achievement and validation from others, only to feel exhausted, like it was never enough, and even worse, like I was never enough. The thing is, I didn't even know I was abandoning myself in the process of making sure I was meeting the needs of everyone and everything around me, until it significantly impacted my health. Now I live life differently. I live with more peace, more joy, and more freedom in my mind and body. I've uncovered my self-worth, which has allowed me to live more authentically and in alignment with my true self. I see myself and my life through a whole new lens. Are you ready to stop abandoning yourself and begin living your life with more ease and purpose? Let's do this together. In today's podcast, we delve into the art and science of meaningful interactions. It is dedicated to the topic that resonates deeply with everyone, and that is the importance of conscious communication. In a world where messages get lost in translation and misunderstandings can create barriers, mastering the skill of intentional and self-aware communication is more crucial than ever. And that is why I'm so honored to have Chuck Wisner on the podcast today. Chuck is the author of The Art of Conscious Conversations, transforming how we talk, listen, and interact. He is a coach and speaker focusing on the lost art of conversations. His theories of why, how, and what of conversations deeply dive into the DNA and introduce new tools and practices that transform how we think about and be in them more successfully. This was such a great conversation, and I'm so excited to bring it to you. So thank you so much for being here, Chuck. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it as well.
Yes. And so I want to jump in because it's something, what you speak of is just so important for so many people. But can you talk about why we need to take a look at conversations differently?
I'm glad. That's a good question, because I've been in my talks, I've been trying to reframe it. Like, we all say, how can I change my conversations?
Mhm.
Right? We're all curious about that, but then we don't realize that we don't know the what. What are they, and how do they work, and why do they don't work? And then the why is, why bother,
Yeah.
And the why bother is because it's the one common tool we have as humans to do good things, to collaborate, to make agreements, to build relationships. And yet we grow up just adopting patterns from our families and our cultures. And so the why is to become a better, to understand them, and then become a better observer of yourself in conversation. So you can actually see I like to not call them habits, I like to call them patterns. So you can see your patterns and then make a change.
I love that. And I love how you talk about it starts with you. And with that, how is it important to be self-aware of what you are doing? Because I know so many people will go into life and are very unaware of some of the patterns they may have and some of the subconscious beliefs they have going into conversations. Can you talk about that a little bit more? How can we recognize the patterns that we carry that we may not even be aware of?
Yeah. So again, why look at self, right?
Mhm.
Because of our patterns, they in a way they make us lazy, because they're just so easy. We know our reactions, we know our triggers, and we just let that roll, right? And so it makes us lazy in a way. But if we can step back and get a little bit of a distance from our patterns, then we can actually say, oh, wait a minute, that, like, I have patterns that I adopted from my father that weren't healthy. And I had to step back and go, wait a minute, I don't have to be my dad. I can do it a different way. Because when I had young children.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's sort of that ability to witness ourselves. And then from there, you can actually make a change. You can say, well, which one of my patterns are helpful and which one of my patterns are harmful? That
Yeah.
makes sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I love how you talk about that. You've noticed patterns that you want to change in yourself. It resonates with me so much because I've noticed that in myself, like things I'll say and think how I approach conflict and other things. And I'm like, oh, I like it, but then it's to step back was really big for me. And I love how you say
Mm,
that because it is it just you don't know any better sometimes. You just go into it and you're almost like hitting a resistance and you're not even sure why. So I love how
yeah.
you share that. It's like you don't have to continue those patterns, but it's being that aware, bringing that awareness so you can change it.
Yeah. And another piece to it is when we think about them as patterns that we adopted, mostly unconsciously, a lot of our patterns we didn't choose consciously. We picked it up from our family, our culture. But when we think about them as patterns and we recognize that they're just sort of like habits and patterns that we developed, it's you can look at it less judgmentally. You can sort of get a little bit of a distance from it. And instead of beating yourself up for, oh, I was an idiot for eating all that ice cream, or I was an idiot for the way I talked to my friend, you can step back and go, wow, that's an interesting pattern. What was triggering me?
Mhm.
And then in the book, I try to give people tools of how they can dissect, and look into some of their patterns.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a great point because it can be so easy to get into that guilt and shame of
Mm,
ourselves when we
yeah,
notice that and they're like, oh, why am I continuing to go on to this? But that is like we go back to what's most familiar, even if it doesn't serve us. So it's the way our brains work, even
right,
though
right,
not really the most beneficial. But then when we continue to guilt and shame ourselves for doing that, it's like just perpetuating that cycle. So I love how you say it's that
right,
like more objective, non-judgmental, removing ourselves from seeing, what's wrong with us, but what can we change and do differently.
right,
So I
right. A
love that.
pattern that a pattern that's a triggering pattern, a pattern that makes you feel negative, a pattern that makes you feel bad. I mean, those are all worthy to take a fresh look.
Mhm.
Wow, I don't have to react that way, or I don't have to have that automatic pilot trigger. Yeah.
Yeah. From your experience, where have you noticed a big breakdown in conversations and communication amongst people? Where does that tend to start from, especially looking at like the subconscious beliefs? What are some of the more common beliefs that people have that ends up perpetuating some of these cycles of poor conversations?
Yeah. I think it's the attachment of our whatever story we have about some life event or something happening in the world or in a relationship. We have our brain helps us create a story immediately. And so we sort of have these stories, and then we tend to get attached to them. So our ego gets attached to it, right? And then instead of being able to go into a conversation and say, well, I have a perspective on this, um, and I'm happy to listen to your perspective, right? We go in with our perspective, and we tend to need to defend that
Mhm.
because our identity, our ego is all wrapped up in it. So the ability to give yourself a little space is really the crux of why we don't listen as well, because we have our story running, we have our background noise running, and we just can't um, open up to different ideas, right? So it's the attachment that keeps us locked down sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes the hotter the subject, the more we get attached.
Mhm. So true.
Right.
And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, so many people get stuck in that, listen to respond rather than listen to understand. And then it doesn't go anywhere. And if
Right.
you're someone who is a self-aware and you recognize those patterns in yourself and you're actively trying to move yourself in a direction where you are more receptive, but if you're with someone who is very ego driven, how does that work? How do you have a conversation with someone who maybe is totally not even aware that they're doing this, but yet you're trying to come to a common ground?
Right. Right. So there's a metaphor or analogy that I like, where when we are hooked on our perspective or our opinion, um, we enter conversations like with a closed fist,
Mhm.
right? Because all the thinking is buried inside of that fist, but we're like, no, I'm right. And I'm going to do everything I can to prove myself right and prove you wrong. So when we do our own work, what we learn to do is dissect our opinion. Like there's facts, there's emotions, And then inside of our opinions, there are our desires, our concerns, standards we live by, and power issues are everywhere, right? When we take a little bit of a time to dissect and go, why am I feeling so strongly about this? What do I want? What are my desires? What do I want? What are my concerns? What are the power issues with me and my friend, or me and my boss? I mean, it's huge, or me and my kids, right? And then what standards am I judging by?
Mhm.
And again, like our patterns, we didn't even adopt, we pretty much adopted standards unconsciously, right? So when we do our work and we open our hand a little bit, we are modeling an open sort of way of, I'm not saying don't give up your position, but you can give up your position with an open hand instead of a fist.
Mhm.
Now, if we're doing this and we're meeting someone with a fist, our only option is really good questions.
Mhm.
Like, don't try to say they're wrong. Say, well, here's my opinion, and I'm interested in how you think. And good questions mean asking them to go a little, to reveal a little more than just this is wrong or it should be this way. So good questions say, well, what are your concerns about that? And when you're worried about it, what standards are you judging? What should be happening versus what is happening? And what are your desires? So if we can ask those questions, we can pry their fingers open.
Yeah.
And so two things happen. A, our ability to be vulnerable and say, I don't have all the answers, but I have a position, and I'm totally willing to tell you why I think this way.
Mhm.
Sort of a humble, vulnerable move. But when we do that, that's actually a contagious human thing. Other people feel it, and when we can be in that conversation, we start sort of synchronizing with their head and their heart, and then sometimes it's very inviting for people to just relax their guard and go, yeah, I'll tell you how I'm feeling. and
Yeah.
and that can shift the conversation.
Mhm. I love that. It's such a great tip. And just that, to approach it from asking questions is, I love that because it's, again, when we start to do some introspection, it's like asking ourselves the right questions. But if we
Right.
can do that in conversations, that is so powerful. So I love that. I love that approach. And it's just something that's so actionable. And for someone who's listening, who's maybe in a dynamic like that, it's like, okay,
Mm,
here's something you can do to start moving forward. And hopefully, like you said, unclenching that fist and meet some
right.
common ground there.
Yeah. Yeah.
When
And those four things, desires, concerns, power, authority issues, and
Yeah.
standards, are really four things to put on your little post-it note or in your fridge to remember. A, that's how you can look inside your own stuff, and B, this is how you can ask good questions.
I love that. Yeah. And for someone who's like, because I know a lot of the people who listen to my podcast are like those overthinkers, can
Mm,
overanalyze. And sometimes that can almost be a problem where you're so self-aware that you're almost questioning yourself and lack that trust within yourself to know what's right versus what's like over analyzing of it.
right.
You have any suggestions for someone who's listening who's like, okay, I am so self-aware, but I don't even know what's my truth, what's not, trying to like, make sure everybody else is okay and not themselves. How do you kind of find your own North Star and be able to trust what you need and how you approach things?
Yeah. So, the book is divided up or structured around four types of conversations. And we've been talking a little bit about our stories and about collaboration, but the third conversation is a creative conversation. And and that's about recognizing how we've all been trained to trust our rational, literal left brain, right? And in fact, the right brain, which is a creative sort of, it's also the part that sort of connects all the dots, can see things from a bigger perspective, almost a meta perspective. In fact, Einstein called the left brain the servant of the right, but we've gotten it backwards.
Mhm.
Um, but I bring that up because recognizing to learn to develop and trust our right brain, then that comes along with intuitions, trusting our intuitions. We can be logical, we can be rational, but then we have gut feelings, and both have value. And so to allow yourself to experience what that means, to just put the literalness aside and go, okay, but over here, what's possible that isn't happening? How do I feel in my gut? What would I feel like if this changed? To give yourself permission to have that conversation with yourself and with other people.
Yeah, I love that. I know that obviously the gut is very much in tune with, our subconscious mind, and even just like a spiritual side, recognizing that. Is there any other part in our body that we can maybe use to kind of guide us in where we're going, using that intuitive response?
Yeah. So I think it was Proust that said our emotions are an upheaval of our thinking.
Mm.
And so the way I say it is we sort of get it backwards. We think the emotions are driving, but it's actually every emotion you have, whether it's a trigger or an anger or a frustration, it's thinking underneath that is producing that emotional reaction, right? Because so it's a physical manifestation of your thoughts, right?
Yeah.
And so what was your question?
Is there anywhere else in the body we can maybe sense to
Ah,
lead us? Yeah, since I
yeah,
know the gut is such a strong connection, is there anywhere else we can use in our body to give us that?
yeah. So when we are in a conversation and uh things aren't going so well, or we're frustrated or we're disappointed or whatever the emotion is, the body is there before your cognitive brain kicks in. So, I mean, I know people who, when they're stressed, their shoulders just rise up. They're like,
Yeah.
you know, and
You-
other others,
Yep.
it's in their gut. Others, it's somewhere else, a headache.
Mhm.
For me, if I get really stressed and someone's confronting me, my mouth dries out in an instant.
Mhm.
Um, so to recognize what your body is trying to tell you,
Mhm.
because generally it's fear-based. It's like, I'm afraid of something.
Mhm.
But if you can just oh, my belly is telling me I'm afraid, but what am I afraid of? And then you can say, well, maybe I don't need to be afraid of that. Maybe I can stand up and say my piece, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
So I'd say the first step is learning to listen to your body, because it's ahead of your head.
Yeah.
It gets there really fast, and
Mhm.
then you get flooded with the chemicals, right? So to slow that process down a little bit is really good. It reminds me of Daniel Kahneman, who just died 2 weeks ago, who wrote the book Slow versus Fast,
Mhm.
Thinking Slow versus Thinking Fast,
Yeah.
right? And that a thing about we can react and we can go fast, but when we take the time to reflect and go, wait a minute, what's my body telling me? Wait a minute, what am I concerned about? Wait a minute, why am I making this judgment? Slows things down, but you're going to be far more wise at the end of that than just rushing into your standard reaction.
Oh, I love that. And it's like, so many things you said is just knowing yourself and be really
Mm,
connecting with yourself just seems like such a huge theme for helping with communication. And
mm,
like, I think that's so important because I think sometimes we get bombarded with like knowing all the information or knowing the other person or trying to plan everything. But it's
mhm.
like when you can come back to yourself, it just seems so much more palpable, and the fact that you can do that each time without having to feel like you're bombarded by everything that you're supposed to do. So
Right. Well, the
yeah.
more grounded we are in our own skin, right? Say there's a hot subject to be discussed, the more we're grounded in, okay, I know what the facts are. I know what my standards are. I know why I feel the way I feel. And we're just grounded in that, then whatever comes at us, it's that grounding in facts, or grounding in reality, grounding in self-awareness that
Mhm.
allows us to navigate that difficult conversation, or that the incoming signals
Yeah.
much more effectively, and be more present, you
Yeah.
know, and open, and invite a different kind of conversation.
Yeah, it's almost like creating your own sense of safety so that you're not trying to seek it in the conversation. Like if you come in feeling safe, you already have a place to feel that without relying on the other person doing, quote, the right thing or
The
saying,
right thing. Yeah.
yeah.
Or you're worried that, oh my gosh, if they say that, that'll really set me off. Well,
Mhm.
do your homework ahead of time. If someone says that, why is that bothersome for you? And how
Mhm.
could you ground yourself in a different truth, that it doesn't have to do that?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's like everything's information. When we have those triggers, that's just another way we can process that information.
Right.
So important. If you're in the middle of a conversation, kind of going off of that, if you're in the middle of a conversation, it seems like you're grounded, everything is going well, but then all of a sudden you feel like an uprising of emotion and you
Mhm.
start to feel yourself almost like getting into that reactive state. Do you have any strategies or tools that you can use to bring yourself back to a place where you can be a little bit more understanding and not feel
Mhm.
so reactive during it?
Yeah, I think when that happens, we're all pretty well schooled or trained into defensive moves. Something triggers us, we get defensive, we start pointing fingers. We
Mhm.
all know the story of your pointing fingers, there's three fingers pointing back at you, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So if verse, the opposite of getting defensive is recognizing, oh boy, I'm really uncomfortable now. My shoulders are hunching, I'm getting tense, my legs are tense. And we go, well, what's that about? Just ask yourself, what is this about? Oh, I'm really worried about X. Or I see that what they want and what I want are different.
Mhm.
And then voice that.
Mhm.
See, bring it to the surface and say, I just got sort of thrown off because I just realized that what you're saying and what you want and what I'm wanting or what you desire and what I desire are not lined up. Let's talk about that. Or I just realized when you said, this project is going nowhere or you aren't working hard enough, that really triggered me. And I really need to understand what that means to you. What's your standard of what enough work is?
Mhm.
See, so it's catching yourself real time, doing a little bit of self-reflection. You don't have to go off for an hour and do this. You just try to do it. And then you in an open way, open your fist and you go, okay, but here's my concern, and just demonstrate that kind of humility and that kind of concern.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And I love how, just being so candid about that can really open up that conversation more without, I think sometimes we get stuck in almost like we have to hide these things and like put on a
Right.
brave face. But I love that
Right.
you're saying like, here, no, say your needs during it, and then it can move and progress if you're at least showing what your needs are.
Yeah,
And that,
and if the other person doesn't move, you've done your best, you
Mhm.
know, then they have their work to do. Tell them to come talk to me, but they have their work to do,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you can't do it for them, but you can do your best by being open and vulnerable and honest.
Mhm.
Now, I can hear people in the background going, "Oh, it's not safe in corporate America or whatever," and there are risks, because there's bad leaders,
Mhm.
and there's bad actors.
Mhm.
So while doing this, you also have to have your antennas up to know if a bad actor is playing games,
Mhm.
and then you have to stand on your solid ground
Yeah.
and have your boundaries
Mhm.
and take care of yourself and be able to say no.
Mhm.
We're all addicted to yes. Uh,
Mhm.
we're all addicted to sure, I can do that, but to have your boundaries, be able to say no and protect yourself. So
Mhm.
those two go hand in hand.
Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head. And that's something so many I know of my listeners struggle with, is kind of like that self-abandonment, in
Mm,
that make everybody happy, make, people pleasing, and yet in themselves, they're not communicating what their needs are
right,
and struggle with those boundaries. And
right.
I would love to dive into that a little bit more, the boundaries, because this is something that, it's talked about
Mhm.
all the time, but then when you actually put it into action and you actually communicate this, it can be one of those like points where it causes a rift in people. Can you
Mm.
talk about how can we communicate boundaries and honor our needs with someone maybe who is not going to be receptive in that as much?
Yeah. Well, when we dissect or when we sort of deconstruct boundaries,
Mhm.
they're really about standards.
Mhm.
What's my physical bubble? What's their physical bubble, right? Cultures have different physical bubbles. What's my standard for how a decision gets made? What's my standard for how a leader should behave, right?
Yeah.
And so just recognizing that boundaries are very personal, and sometimes these these kinds of things like our standards are in the background of our consciousness, and we forget that how powerful they are, and so we forget to bring them forward. But
Mm-hmm.
if we could say, wow, right now I'm feeling really uncomfortable because I need feel like I need to protect myself because I'm concerned about X. Or my standard is, honestly, I don't like being talked to that way. So you might want to not to address that, but that's why I'm concerned right now. So again, a little bit of dissection, a little bit of deconstruction to go, what is this boundary issue? What's the standard underneath that's driving my fear or driving my reaction? Does that
Yeah.
connect?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that the hit the nail on the head is like that investigation because you said it exactly as you're saying. It's like it's that unconscious. You're not even aware of it, but something just
Mm,
doesn't jive, and that very much spoke to me because I think I've struggled with that in my life, and I know many people who I help also struggle with that. It's like there's something that doesn't feel right, but you don't really know exactly what it is, and
what it
until
is.
for me, it was investigating that and understanding that's what it was, that there were boundaries being washed over. And
Right.
I think that's a beautiful way to say it. It's just that it's there and something's gonna feel just a little off until you do the investigation.
Yeah. Yeah. And if it's safe, you can state what your standard is. I mean, a silly example is I've been married for many, many years with my wife, but and we do a lot of this work together.
Mhm.
So um, early in our relationship, there was always a little battle about who was cleaning up the kitchen after dinner. I like to cook, she likes to bake, but then we have a big mess, and she likes to go to bed. So we joke that she likes to go to bed like a maid, which
Uh-huh.
means she likes to spend her time cleaning up the kitchen.
Mhm.
So when she wakes up as a queen,
Uh-huh. Oh, I love
right?
that.
Me, on the other hand, my standard, my boundary is I like to just go to bed like a king
Uh-huh.
and wake up like a butler.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And in relationships, those things that seem so trivial really can create a lot of tension.
Yeah.
But us realizing we had different standards around that and boundaries around how we want to spend our time and talking about that, it becomes lighter, and now we can give each other a hard time, or we can laugh about it, or we say, it's my turn to go to bed. You want to step and queen it? I mean, we made it, have at it,
Yeah. Hmm.
but it becomes lighter because it's out, it's on the surface.
Yeah. It's not the elephant in the room anymore, right? It's,
Right, right, right.
yeah.
Where
Kind of
we shoot darts at
accepting
each
this is a
other.
thing. Yeah.
Right, right. Hmm.
What happens? Because I know with relationships, it's like once you start having that breakdown of communication, you're not communicating. Like, is that really kind of like the crux of it? It's like that once communication stops, things start to kind of repel each other. Can you talk about that? Like how dynamics, even if you're communicating, maybe it's not the best communication, but like how do dynamics change when there is communication versus no communication?
Yeah. Well, I think when there's is as we move towards do the self-reflection around our stories and our opinions and thing, we open our hand and we get better at collaborating, right? Um, that just invites a mutual sort of understanding in a relationship, that I'm not expecting that person to change, or maybe they're not expecting me to change, but we have a better understanding, right? And so conversations where we disagree become easier
Mm-hmm.
because we have that open, oh, wow, I look at it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I never thought of it that way, and maybe I can change my mind. Right. So it's that ability to sort of go reveal a little more, be a little more vulnerable, that then brings relationships closer. You're still going to disagree, but you do it in a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Hmm. It's powerful. And you've mentioned vulnerability a few times, and I think that's like, that's key. It seems like that you have to have some kind of vulnerability when you're approaching conversations, and it's like, oh, would you say it's kind of like the opposite of the ego? Like if you approach from ego and then vulnerability is on the other side of the scale, is it like that with conversations or?
Yeah. Yes. Well, ego is a whole tough subject, but
Yeah.
um, I'd say the vulnerability. it's a practice. I like to think of it like a pendulum.
Mhm.
Like, so if something happens in real time, let's say it triggers me, and it's like, oh God, I can't believe this is happening. Ah. And then we go, and then 2 hours later, maybe 2 days later, go, why was I so upset about that? When she said to me or he said to me X, I lost it. But 2 hours later, we go, wait a minute, what was that about? And we do a little bit of self-searching, right? A little bit of investigation, right? And we go, oh, I see. When she said that, that triggered my insecurity around something,
Mhm.
or I had a different standard. Oh, interesting. And now, with that little bit of self-awareness, then the next time it happens, maybe we move it, it happens, and then 2 minutes later we go, wait a minute, that's that same thing. I can, I understand this, and I can talk about this, or I can bring this into the conversation. So we're trying to move it to where we point in real time, we can catch ourselves and go, oh, wow, that was really a big trigger for me. And I'm wondering if it's because X,
Mhm.
right? And so it's this practice of, and it is a practice because we're screwing around with our neurons.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right?
You're literally rewiring. Yeah.
We're rewiring, like we're
Yeah.
changing the software, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So it takes time, and it takes, you might not get it right the first time. You might not have the right conversation, but you moved a little bit in the right direction.
Mhm.
And so there is a practice element because we're shifting, we're shifting patterns that maybe we've done for 20 years.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so you can't, I often joke with clients about, okay, do you want to stop doing that? It's yes, I never want to stop doing that. It's okay. So I have a magic switch, but will you pay me $5,000 to switch it off? And most people say yes.
I'm sure. Yes. It's hard work. Yeah. I think if I
Yeah, yeah. And
skip
if,
the work.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the bad news is there's no magic switch. If
Yeah.
there were, I'd be a rich man. Right.
100%. Yes. People will be paying good money. 5,000 would be a bargain for that. Because yeah,
Right.
yeah, especially when you're talking about deep-seated patterns. And
Right.
maybe you're not even aware of. I mean,
That's right.
it's tremendous. But I think the big thing is, and I think what's hopeful is that the brain is always adaptable and can always shift based on the stimulus that you give it and the change in beliefs that you give it. So
Right.
I think
Right.
that's the exciting part of this, even though it's hard work.
It's hard work, yeah. But
Yeah.
even, so we do our self work, but then if we read a book or if we see a lecture or something, those influence us because it's all about sort of waking up a little bit more every day, being more aware, being more conscious, being more present, right? So a
Yeah.
book might influence, a teacher might influence us, a coach might influence us,
Mhm.
and we still got to do our work.
Yeah. And that's the cool thing. It's like even whoever's listening to this right now, your brain's going to be different after this conversation than it was even a half hour ago. So, I mean,
Right.
that's the really cool thing is that everything that you're giving your brain as far as stimulus is going to change it. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah. One of my teachers, Raphael Echeverria, um, he used to say to us, I live in New England, and he would say, okay, so if we go to Alaska for 6 months and we live with the Inuits,
Mhm.
and they have it's controversial, but they have somewhere from 20 to 40 names for snow.
Mhm.
And he
Yeah.
said, if we lived with them and we learned their names for snow and why that distinction was important,
Mhm.
right? Igloo snow or whatever it is, we learned that when we came back to New England, we would never see snow the same way
Mhm. Yeah.
because we now have new distinctions that change how we see and how we think.
Mhm.
And I think of language that way. I think of conversations that way. If we can understand what conversations are and what they're made of and how they work, um, and we sort of really start paying attention in a new way, be better observers of ourselves and others in conversations, and we study a little bit, we change our view of what conversations are
Mhm.
and what's possible.
Yeah, yeah, and it's amazing because it's not necessarily the reality. It's like almost the lens in which you see it all, and the
Right.
lens changes, and it's just like that idea of snow. It's like you would never think of snow the same because now your lens is different. And like I
Mm-hmm.
experience that when I read books. I'll read a book and then like I'll have my life, go on and change, and then I go back to the book and I'm like, oh my gosh, like you see the book different and the words are different and
Yes.
different things stick out. And it's like you can see that happen in your life and just your perspective changing as you're gaining perspective, which is
Yeah.
absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's great.
it's incredible. And I think that's such a huge point is like literally you can change. That's that quick change because neurologically it changes very quickly. And to have that change in lens is you can have that overnight, just to
Yeah.
change your perspective and seeing like today I'm going to see more that there is to be joyful for, or of.
Right.
And like I think that's just so
Right.
profound with the brain.
Yeah. 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 Actually, we ask ourselves one question and it can change everything. Do
Hmm.
I need to do X? Do I need to think that way? Do I need to feel that way? You
Yeah.
know, and then, or saying to us, today I'm going to pay attention to gratitude. Today I'm going to pay attention to, like, it's becoming spring here. So for me, it's like every little flower is like, wow.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it changes your whole mood too. And then
Yeah.
now you want to see more of it, and then your brain knows how to filter out the world in a better way that's
Right.
serving you and moving you in the direction of your vision. So it's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
I
It's
want to
great.
just touch on one other thing because I think this is really important. Something that my audience tends to struggle with is judgment, and
Mm.
either judgment of ourselves or people who judge us and how that impacts us. And can you talk about that? Like when we have these conversations that feel very judgmental, or people have opinions and they kind of put them on us, or even like ourselves, we become judgmental of. Can you
Yeah.
talk about how to navigate that?
Yeah. So the part of my book on storytelling really breaks down stories into three components.
Mhm.
There's the emotional component. Something happens and we have an emotional reaction, right?
Mhm.
And that's understandable. Then there's the ego. But the whole thing of this investigation is become more aware of our emotions and the thinking underneath. So emotions are signs that we need to do some work,
Mhm.
or say negative emotions are signs.
Mhm.
Then there are facts that, which has become quite controversial, right? But not forget politics. I mean, we are humans that share biology and share structure and share brain capabilities that allow us to agree on things. This is the microphone. Black is black, except for unless you're colorblind, or green is green unless you're colorblind. But we agree on things, and it's so important to remember that there are fundamental truths that are great to ground any conversation. So when someone's judging you, you might have an emotional reaction, but don't forget to, instead of just reacting, don't forget to say, well, is there truth in that? Or is there not truth in that?
Mhm.
Right. And if there's not, then that can become part of the conversation. When you make that judgment, I think that here's what I understand happened. He
Mhm.
said, she said, or whatever, like it was recorded. And I have a different conclusion based on that. So I just want to lay that out there that this taking the time to know what is the foundation of factual or truths that we can stand on, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then this thing about judgment gets so messy because it's our opinions,
Mhm.
which we're addicted to again, right? We're attached to. And that's why I introduce the four uh, archetypal questions of what are your standards, what are your desires, what are your power issues, and what are your concerns? Because those are the tools that you can say, okay, I have an opinion about this, but before I go in and make this judgment, like that was really a stupid thing you did in the meeting, or I can't believe you forgot to do X, Y, and Z, just take 2 minutes and do a little homework. What are you concerned about? What did you want to have happen? Did they agree did they know that that's what it was going to happen? We make bad promises all the time. The
Mhm.
last conversation in my book is commitment conversations, and we make bad promises all the time
Mhm.
um, because we're addicted to yes. So judgments are messy because of our ego, because we forget to ground ourselves in facts, and because opinions are just messy. They're not, they're confusing. They're we want to defend ourselves, we want to be right, but we just have to look inside and say, well, how am I thinking that makes this so important to me?
Yeah, it's so empowering what you just said, because a lot of times that when you experience judgments, you do think that they are facts. Like, especially if they
Mm,
come from somebody of authority, you're like, oh, well, that must be true. They
right.
obviously know what they're talking about. So to have that question that we can ask ourselves, like, is that true, is so empowering. And again, you talked about space prior, but again, giving yourself that space and to slow down and
Hmm.
interpret that and really build yourself up in the process of like, okay, I don't have to take that as my truth. I think
Right.
that's such an empowering thing
Yeah,
to.
and we don't, the thing about authority is that because we generally aren't thinking about that, but it's in every conversation we have. You-
Mhm.
my wife and I, there's power issues. Me and my kids, there's power issues. Me and people that hire me, there's power issues, and everywhere. It's everywhere. But we don't generally think about it like, what voice do I give authority to? So
Mhm.
one person might tell you look like hell today,
Mhm.
right? And you go, huh, it doesn't matter to me, right?
Yeah.
Another person could say that, a friend or something, or someone you respect them and trust them. You might go, whoa, maybe there's something to what they're saying.
Mhm.
So we unconsciously give power to other people's voices.
Mhm.
And again, that's going to go away, but to be aware of it versus being a victim of it is what's
Mhm.
crucial.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, that's it. Like that victimhood, because a lot of times you can be on that receiving end and think like, I have nothing, I can't do anything about this. They said it and now it's going to penetrate me and I have to live with this feeling. But like when you realize you don't have to be a victim to that, that's huge. And to realize that like you can actually be your own victor and take that and create something, in yourself that is empowering and resilient to those things. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love that.
it's amazing. Yeah, and Miguel Ruiz, do you know the book, The Four Agreements?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, because one of his agreements was don't take anything personally.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Because if they're throwing a judgment at you, I use the metaphor, they're throwing a dart at you, the poison dart, right? You got to catch it, you
Hmm.
know, and remember it belongs to them. You don't have to let it in, you
Hmm.
know. Maybe if you really respect that person, you can let it in, but you do it in a way it's like, help me understand why you think that way and what is there something I can learn. But you don't have to let it in, just it's theirs. If you want to give it back, it's perfectly fine. Or if you want to throw it to the winds and say, screw this, I could care less about
Yeah,
that.
I love that visual, because it's like sometimes you can hear those things, but when you have that visual of like, oh, that was a dart and I'm not going to let it penetrate me, that's like such a
Right.
great visual and something that I mean, I'll take with me is like, okay, when I experience that, I can look at that as a dart and that it is reflective of the person, not of who
No.
I am.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's tremendous. I love that.
Hmm.
For someone who's listening and they're receiving this and they want to get better, what would you say is the first place to start as far as like getting better at understanding yourself and really being aware so you know how you're coming into conversations?
Yeah. I, I would say the first thing is to put the four questions: desires, concerns, authority, and standards somewhere that you can refer to them. Because I've been teaching this a long time, and it takes a while for this to stick. It doesn't stick always. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. But to really let it stick. But secondly is to also understand that there are different types of conversations, because often in conflict, there people are in a different type of conversation. One is trying to solve a problem, one is trying to tell a story, one is trying to find a mutual solution or compromise. One is dreaming about what else might be possible, and it just on. And meetings are like that. We're all in different conversations. So understanding there are different kinds of conversations, and then what patterns do you have where you say you enter a meeting and you're going in with your story. What's your pattern? Do you go in like this? Do you go in like this? Do you go in afraid? Do you go in open? What are our patterns at a sort of a meta level to understand? Um, and I think that just those simple distinctions can start to give us a new way to observe
Mhm.
without judgment,
Yeah, thank you
with
for
less judgment.
sharing that. Yeah, I love all those, and it just takes off that automatic, the automatic behaviors and just allows you to like see it and for what it is. And
Right.
I think those are amazing. And thank you for sharing those. And for someone who wanted to connect with you, get your book, where can they find you?
So the book is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble or your favorite bookstore. You might have to order it. Uh, my website is chuckwisner.com, and I'm on Instagram. I think that's where you found me.
Yep.
Chuck
Yep.
underscore Wisner.
Mhm.
And I'm sort of made a transition the last 3 or 4 years. I'm not doing as much corporate work, and I'm doing one-on-one advising and coaching, so people can reach out. And I'm doing speaking too, so
Amazing.
speaking
And
in groups.
amazing. I'll put everything in the show notes too. So if you're listening, definitely check that out and connect with Chuck. And I just want to thank you again so much for being on today and sharing so many valuable things in this conversation that I know people are going to take and really have that moment of pause to realize, like, how am I approaching this? So thank you
Right.
again.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I
Yeah.
love spreading the word.
I feel like it cannot be spread enough. Like, this is something like communication. It's one of those things that, like, you cannot communicate it about enough. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
really is that. So I hope that for anyone listening, they can take some of these gems and really apply to their life and see relationships transform and themselves transform. So again,
Yep.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Rewiring Health. I hope you found our conversation both enlightening and empowering. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to Rewiring Health so that you never miss an update. Also, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you could take a moment to rate and review the show, it would mean the world to me and help others discover the power that we all have within us to create change and create the life that we truly, truly desire. Thank you so much for spending your precious time with me and sharing the energy of the show.